and some stuff that's probably a little bit more specific. What I'd really like all of you in the audience to do is to hijack this whenever you want and ask me questions along the way. And hopefully David will help. Maybe he'll look in the chat for those questions and ask me. I don't mind being interrupted, and it probably helps the flow. What's difficult is talking about planting a garden statewide. I have never planted a garden on the east side of the state. It's either been the Willamette Valley or it's been Minnesota. So I will try my best to answer any questions from the east side. So generally speaking, when I'm doing these topics, I'm usually talking about pollinator gardens in general. And this one, I'm going to try to gear all just to bees and leave those dang butterflies out of the way. So here we go. I find a lot of people ask how, I want to do a butterfly garden, I want to do a bee garden, pollinator garden, etc. And it's an interesting topic. And I'm going to go, I just promise you, I've talked about bees. I'm going to talk about butterflies for a second. I get a lot of people who want to do butterfly gardens. And then I ask them, are you talking about providing a habitat for butterflies that enhances their population? Or are you talking about, in essence, just putting out bird feeders where you put out flowers and you can view the butterflies? Because they're totally different approaches to building these types of gardens. And nothing's wrong, but I think oftentimes we hear about people putting in, a pollinator garden, and we don't ask them the questions like, well, what were you trying to do? Were you trying to attract more species to the garden that you have? Were you trying to increase the abundance of them and just support the species that you already have? Have you thought about providing nesting sites, or you're just thinking about the flower side of the equation? Or you're trying to maybe solve a problem. You're trying to get rid of a lawn, or you're trying to, maybe you're like me, getting older and getting busier at work, and so you're trying to lower the maintenance in your garden or low water use. There's all sorts of reasons to do it, but all of those reasons are going to affect how you approach and how you design your garden. And probably the last one is you might already have a garden and you're just looking at adding a few plants here or there. Maybe what are those key species that you're at? So I think the first thing to do is start with these questions and figure out what you really want when you're saying you want a garden to attract bees. Because I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that we are just creating gardens. We're not. It's really hard unless you have a large piece of land to actually create what we're talking about as far as habitat goes. That takes years, and it takes, at some point, letting your garden go into balance itself, because nature wants to go in a certain direction. And a lot of us keep fighting it because we want our garden to look exactly like we want it to look. And nature's saying, well, I actually need some weeds in this area because there's too much dirt. So first, figure out what your goals are when you're thinking about wanting a garden. And the topic of planting in the fall is maybe a fairly simple topic, and I'm probably going to answer that in one slide, and then we're going to move on. So if you're planting a garden, gardeners know that the best time to plant is in the fall. Why? Probably the easiest answer to that is because you don't have to water once you get it planted in the fall for at least 6 months. And it gives the plants a long time to establish before we get our hot summers in the Northwest. If you're looking at doing what I'd call a pollinator meadow or any sort of wildflower meadow or direct seeding, many of the native seeds all need cold stratification. That means they have to go through a cold period. And so seeding in the fall is a great plan. You can cheat that system if you want and put them in a refrigerator. But I find sometimes it doesn't get cold enough to really trigger a bunch of the seeds, and it just seems like a lot of work for me, and I'd rather have room for my beer or whatever. So, but you can do that. The other reason is if you're actually planting plugs or you're planting pots of flowers, gallons or whatever, even though the plant's not growing above the ground, it gives them a good start they're going to be growing underground, and they really need that to get established. If you're going to plant in the fall, general common wisdom is you're supposed to plant at least 6 weeks before the first frost. I think there's a lot of wiggle room in that. You know, if you're 8 weeks before the first frost, you're fine. If you're 4 weeks before the first frost, you're probably fine. It probably depends on what happens after that first frost. Do we have 9 more days of frost, or does it bump back up to 60 degrees? So, but you should get it in. When we say in the fall, it's not like super late in the fall. It's probably within the next 3 weeks would be good, depending on where you're at. The other thing is plants. Although there's a lot of native plant societies and some conservation districts, etc., that are starting to offer more plants for native plants for sale in the fall, generally speaking. Nurseries don't want to increase their inventory in the fall going into winter and have to hold all those plants over. So generally speaking, they are trying to blow out plants. But on the other side of the equation, since they're not building up their inventory, they oftentimes don't have as good of a selection. And quite frankly, for those of you who are buying your plants by sight, meaning you're looking for pretty flowers, the flowers won't be on those plants. So you'll just have to make sure that you know what plant you're buying. So there's goods and bads. As far as just the sheer what's best for the plant, planting in the fall is the best. So cold stratification, planting meadows. This is a meadow that I planted here at Clark Public Utilities. If you're thinking about doing a meadow, this particular meadow, this site around our solar array was 100% lawn, and we mowed it like anybody else would mow a lawn. And we killed the lawn, rototilled it, watered it, let the weeds come up, killed it, rototilled it, just kept repeating that for a full year to take care of as much of the weed seed bank as possible. But then we planted this, or we seeded it in the fall so that it got the cold stratification over winter, and then it came right up. This seed mix came from Heritage Seedlings in Oregon, worked beautifully. Blue Gilia came up first, and the whole entire meadow was blue, and then it turned to this pumpkin orange, and the blue-eyed Mary's there, and then it switched over to the Clarkia, and then Madia came on. So it had all these successions of blooms. But the cold stratification, part of the reason why you want to start this stuff maybe 6 weeks before the frost, some of these species will actually establish and start growing above ground and below ground and hold your soil through the winter. Others won't even, they won't even break the seed coat until after that stratification. But to hold the soil in, it's good to get this in early. If you were to do this right before frost, you wouldn't have those early ones that are going to hold your seed in. So meadows take a little bit of timing, not overly complicated. Probably the most complicated part of meadows is maintaining them afterwards, because it won't look like this every year. It won't look like this next year. Certain plants are going to take over. The blue gilia is going to drop out of that seed mix because it's an annual and it's just not that strong of a plant. But as a public utility, I needed something in color right away because that thing had been brown for a year, and I didn't want to hear from the public that we had a brown patch around it. So some of it's just, as a public utility, we have we're public facing, so you just have to look good all the time. So generally speaking, if I'm talking to gardeners, mostly master gardeners, I guess, they're always, when they're thinking about planting pollinator gardens, they're thinking about the flowers. And I just pulled this screen off of iNaturalist. This is from the Oregon Bee Atlas project, and Washington Bee Atlas is starting to populate a similar database. And I just found it really interesting. This is the top 15 plants that the Oregon Bee Atlas have caught bees off of. Now, that does not mean that rabbit brush has the most bees. Frankly, it means that from late August through September. It's the only plant that we can find around in bloom, so everybody goes and tries to catch on it. But the interesting part that I think, if you look at this screen, the majority of all the plants there are yellow, and the second most are white, and then there's some purple in there. And if you go on the Oregon Bee Atlas and you look at the species of plants we've caught bees off of, and you keep going down, it's generally going to be yellow, white, and blue or purple for most of the plants. You can find bees in all sorts of colors, but these are the ones that seem as a color scheme to attract them. And those of you who know bees, they see also in the ultraviolet light. So a lot of these things that we see, like that common dandelion that looks yellow to us, probably is not yellow to a bee. It's probably got a different color in the center. But I just find that interesting, and it's been for last 3 years. I've noticed this trend. It's yellows, whites, and blues tend to be the ones that we tend to find bees on. But again, don't think that this is in order of which are the best plants. Unless you want to plant the dandelions, go for it. Or the common cats here in your yard, you could do that. Okay. So if we put color aside, what else should we look at for the plants that we're gonna need for attracting bees or creating this habitat? One, there's the question of native versus non-native and everything in between. And we'll go through that a little bit. The data's not necessarily as cut and dry as it would be for the butterflies and moths. But we'll talk about that a little bit. Bloom duration is an interesting consideration. There are a lot of plants that are beautiful and they bloom, but those blooms die rather quickly. And bang for the buck, you might want to consider, unless you really want some specialist bee that needs one type of flower, I would probably look at bloom duration to make sure that the plant probably blooms successionally, or if you do a little deadheading, you can keep that bloom going. Third would be seasonality. I think it's really easy for bees to find blooms like late spring or early summer, late summer. But it seems to be the shoulder seasons that if you want to maybe help your garden out, you might take a look at your garden and see if you've got some really early blooming things, like heather is a great one for bumblebees early in the year. In the Northwest, we never know where we're going to get that that first, warm 65, 70-degree weird winter February day. And to have some floral resources ready for them is important, and it will be helpful. Bumblebees can come out. They've been found all 12 months of the year. So depending on where you're at. The other seasonality, the other hub would be the late September, October, even into November, to see if you can make sure that you have some sort of bloom. Usually that tends to be in the Asteraceae family, some sort of bloom late season as well, to help everything, including bumblebees that might still be foraging before they go and go to sleep for the winter. And then some of the late bees that we see out, the Halictidae and the Ceratina, etc. Floral and overall plant structure, there's a couple thoughts in there. We'll talk a little bit about specialty bees. Flowers have all sorts of structures. You have a pea family that has a more complicated flower, I would say, that many bees don't really like, but other ones are specialists on. You have other ones like Asteraceae that seems to be a more accessible flower, and everything in between. So if you're trying to, again, it depends on the purpose of your garden. If you want to do a shotgun approach and try everything, then all sorts of different floral designs would be great. I'm not really a fan of that because I think one of everything does not provide enough resources for your bees. I think you should probably, unless you're a plant geek like me and always have to have that new plant, patches of flowers work better. If you think about it, the bees have to work. They show floral consistency. When they get on a certain species of plant, they like to stay on it. Especially not necessarily the generalists. I've seen bumblebees bounce back and forth, but generally speaking, they like to stay on one species of plant. And if you can provide a patch for them, they'll stay there. They can get their resources. They don't have to expend a lot of energy trying to find the next patch of that same species. So bunches of the same floral pattern would be great. And then when we talk about overall plant structure, there's lots of thoughts in that. Some of it's just about stem structure. You've got bees like Ceratina, the small carpenter bees that like pithy stemmed plants, like an elderberry, where it's not a hollow stem, but the end of the stem has this, when it breaks off, there's this center of it that's very spongy, very easy to excavate, and they will excavate that and then use those excavations for their cells. There's others that like a hollow stem. And so you'll want to look at, it's great to have a hollow stem, but you need a plant that's got a hollow stem that kind of holds up to snow, depending on where you are or whatever. But so overall plant structure is important. I think it probably plays into some other things as well, as far as when we're out looking for bees, especially in the desert that gets really windy, if we can find a place that has tall, dense plants with blooms on the non-windy side, we do a lot better than plants that are exposed and the wind goes right through them. A lot of times the bees, they just hold on until the wind subsides. So giving them, just much like butterflies, giving them some wind protection, I think would be a good idea.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Plant nutrition. So pollen is important, especially for the females. The fats and the lipids are important for egg production. It's important for feeding the larva, etc. The nectar is your carbohydrates, your carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and some trace minerals. Both of those are important. You need to be aware of and do your research, because not all plants produce nectar. Like California poppy is a good example. It produces pollen, but it doesn't produce nectar. That doesn't make it bad. Actually, it's a really good plant. But if you're going to do 100% California poppy in your yard, you probably are missing one part of the equation, and you need a nectar plant in there. But you'll have to do some research. And I guess that's going to be the overall theme of this talk is you can't really make a mistake. You can improve as a gardener, and especially as a bee gardener, the more research you do and the more talking in this type of group right here, because there's just a lot of people in this group that know a lot about these plants specifically and what works well in your area. So providing the proper nutrition is important. And then there's, all the other considerations that might come into play. I can pick a bunch of random ones. Some bees are resin bees. They're looking actually for more like a pine that creates some sort of resin sap that they can use for building their nests. You've got leaf cutter bees that are looking for leaves to partition their nests. They could be looking for petals. There was an interesting study out of the East Coast. Scott McIver, I think his name is. Anyway, he was studying leafcutter bees and which plants that they preferred. And he did something like 50 plus plants that he was studying. And all but half a dozen of those plants, all those plants produce leaves that have antimicrobial properties to them. How they know that was that it seems a fairly substantial amount of leaves that all have one thing in common. Their leafcutter bees aren't necessarily picky. We have them, we do flagging tape when we're doing restoration projects here at the utility. They will cut our flagging tape and use that as nesting material. So I'm not saying they're overly picky, but some of the studies coming out, again, they're kind of fun to read because it's interesting that they use this antimicrobial leaf matter in their nest partitions. And I've read some studies that certain leaves that don't have the really thick veins, they tend to prefer ones that they can manipulate and don't have to worry about some stiff part that doesn't let them put it in a circular tube, so to speak. So there's all sorts of stuff when you want to geek out on this. You can dive into this and go down the rabbit hole as far as you want.
So, Michael, I'm going to jump in with a question.
Got it.
So you were talking about overall plant structure and stem nesters. Can you recommend, or will you cover this later, some examples of good shrubs to plant for stem nesting bees?
Well, elderberry is one of my favorites. Actually, because they tend to snap off a lot, so I don't have to create the ends of their plants. Any of the cane berries, whether it's raspberries, blackberries, all of those, great for stem nesters. If you haven't noticed, if you happen to be near a blackberry patch, the Serotina love blackberries. Monarda is a good one. It's not a shrub, but Monarda is really good. It's got the stems are fairly like tough. There's some of the asters that actually have a good pithy center. That is good for stem nesters. Probably I don't know more than that.
Oh, that's a good list. That's great.
Yeah, off the top of my head. So just I am sure there is a list out there, David, and I don't know it thoroughly like that. But good question. Love the question. So this is from the National Wildlife Federation. And these are what we call bioregions. And what I like about the National Wildlife Federation site, if you haven't been there, and you might know of this from the Doug Ptolemy talks about butterflies. National Wildlife Federation has a database of, it's called Plant Finder. And if you go on there and put in your zip code, it will tell you which plants are the keystone plants, which are the best plants for your area to plant for moths and butterflies. There's also a section on that website that is populated with stuff from Jared Fowler. And Jared Fowler did a lot of research on specialist bees. And there is, by these bioregions, lists of what he and Doug Ptolemy came up with would be the keystone species for bees. And here is, so this is one list that comes up for, I can't remember which bioregion I picked this from. Probably I picked it from mine. It might be from Marine West, I don't know. But this is the type of list you'll find on there. And it's all, like I said, by bioregion. It's about a 2-page document per bioregion. And it comes up with a list of plants that you potentially could find if you put it in your yard, specialist bees that would come to your yard. It's not bad. I have just personal opinion. I'm not really a believer in you build it, they will come, because if you've got bees that aren't traveling over a mile away, unless you've got that species within a mile of your garden, it might take a very long time for it to find you. But it does give you an idea. If you look at this, they rank it. If you look at golden brush at the top, there's a potential for 20 different specialist bees that would use that particular plant in this bioregion that I pulled up right here. So it does give you a list, and it ranks how many species you could attract. The ranunculus at the bottom that only has 5, the odds are you might not find that bee in your area. You can reverse this too, I suppose. On Jared Fowler's website, he actually lists what those bees are, what the 20 bees are. So you could say, you know, in my yard, I have XYZ species of bee. They're doing okay, but they're not doing great. I think I need to plant that plant right there because they tend to be a specialist on that plant. This is a decent. I really actually like this. The only problem I have with this, if you look at the bioregion, like let's just take the green one, for instance, that goes everywhere from almost North Alaska down to California. It's probably unlikely that this is a really good, a really accurate plant list. And I think we need to educate ourselves a little bit more and tighten up these bioregions, because I just think these are way too big. So the green sections is the northwestern forested mountains, and I agree those are forested, but I can tell you in the Siskiyous, there are endemic plants down there that you're not going to find in most of the rest of that green section. So again, need to do a little bit more research. There's another way to look at this. Maybe these are ecoregions here. This actually come from Wikipedia, but their source was EPA's ecoregion map. And you can see the green section is broken up way more, even the Willamette Valley where I'm at, from probably Lane County, Eugene, Oregon, up to Clark County, Vancouver, Ridgefield area. It's one ecoregion, but it doesn't stretch all the way from all the way up into Washington. And you can see Washington is split up in many more ecoregions. And I'll tell you why this is important, or just what rings a bell with me. This section, if you can see this section of Oregon right here, this little pink section right here, this is a really unique section in Oregon. In fact, David Jennings was there this year, and we were there. It tends to have plants and possibly bees that are more aligned with this area over here than the rest of the state. And it's just, if you looked at the other ecoregion map, this was all one area that was all similar. So I think it breaks it up a little bit more, but I will take this one step further. And I'm sorry, but I'm really familiar with mostly Oregon. You've got the Blue Mountains here. The Blue Mountains here in the valley that goes this direction, there's a huge difference in the plant floral communities all along this spectrum here. So again, I hear people say, well, this plant's native in Washington. Well, native in Washington up here is different than native in Washington over here. So need to do a little bit of research. Luckily, there's lots of information online to figure out where these plants, if you just type in whatever the plant name is and do distribution map, you should probably be able to come up with all the native plant distribution areas that you need. I would dial it in more than even this ecoregion map personally.
Right.
If I'm
so Michael, I think this is showing what EPA calls ecoregion level 3.
Correct.
And you could take it to ecoregion level 4.
Yep.
In Washington, I think we have 54 ecoregion level 4. So
yeah, I didn't do that just because it got really busy. And but you're right. Yeah, there's ecoregion 4 is the most dialed in they get. But it doesn't really translate. I haven't found most of the native plant databases actually use that system. But it does tell you that you can't rely on some of these maps as just this overall, gee, if this plant's up in the Wallowas, it means it's going to do really well over here, is not necessarily true. So again, research your plants. So I get a lot of talk to a lot of people. They tell me how great certain plants are, especially Mediterranean plants, and how many bees are on there. This came out of Gail Langalato's lab, the Urban Ecology Lab. And the point of this little picture here is, first look over on the far right, this picture right here. And all of these little dots represent bees that will be on this plant, the types of species that are on this plant. And you'll see there's lots on this plant, but there's only 8. This is lavender, not native. But then you come over to these plants and you see how many different species are on these plants. 16 here, 28 species here, 74 use Douglas aster, and on and on. So what we find is these types of plants over here that are populated with a lot of bees, generally speaking, most of that activity is honeybees, followed by bumblebees. But if you notice over here, these plants have far more species of bees that are populating them rather than the non-native lavender. So when you're talking to people and they tell you, if they ever use here's my rule, if they ever use the word bees and they don't attach it to something like native bees, wild bees, honeybees, bumblebees, they probably are talking about honeybees. And so I always try to get them to clarify, are you talking native bees or are you talking honeybees? Because there's a difference. Honeybees are generalists. They will pretty much go to anything they can get access to, where a lot of these other bees are much more selective in what they are attracted to. And I apologize to all the east side people because this is Willamette Valley, but I can only talk about what I know about. So this is a list of plants that probably serve two functions. Two of those goals that I talked about. Are you trying to attract more species, or are you trying to support the species you have and create more abundance? So if you look at the first one for here, this Phacelia, which Phacelia overall, as Link will tell you, all those Phacelias are amazing plants. So if this one is not native in your area, there are a ton of other silverleaf Phacelia, all sorts of ones to pick up. But if you look right here at abundance, this plant does really well at sheer numbers of bees, not necessarily species, but sheer numbers. Great for building abundance, but it's also good for diversity. And this one, abundance, all these have scores. And you can kind of see which ones have attract a broad variety of bees and which ones just provide really good resources that help you build the abundance in your yard. These are all very good plants. A lot of them, like yarrow, the lower right, we find everywhere in the desert, in the mountains, in the Willamette Valley. It's everywhere. Pearly everlasting everywhere from the valley up to the mountains, not so much in the desert, but a lot of these are fairly widespread plants. But again, you need to do the research because I can't talk for the desert section, except for a few of these. But these are the couple things you need to look at. Are you trying to attract more species, or are you just trying to really give them a good resource? So then we get into this debate on native versus native cultivars, or you might have heard the phrase nativars. Basically, both of these plants, these poppies, have native parents, but it just happens that this one has a gene for this color, and this one, or that expresses, and this one, the gene expresses for this color. These are not, they are both native, but what happens is then the industry takes this one and starts propagating it. And when they do that, they call it a native cultivar. It still had native parents, it's just a cultivar. And so out of Gail Langelotto's lab again, Jen Hayes did a little hypothesis, and she looked at this particular one, California poppy, and she felt that these two probably would be equally attractive to bees. That was her hypothesis, because they both were from wild populations. The result in the end was she was right. So if you look at these graphs over here, all you really need to look at is how long this bar is, or how big this bar is. This is how many bee visitations there were, 0, 3, 6, 9, 12. And you'll see that this one here, that was over here, and this one down here, which is right here, they have about the same bee visitation. So she was right. Both of those attracted the same amount. Even this Mikado one didn't come, it wasn't far in behind, but this particular one right here did not do well at all in 2021. And I bring this up because, like I said, all this stuff's a little fuzzy because one, this is only a 2-year study so far, or at least these results are. And two, this just has to be repeated over and over again to see if the same results come about. But you can't make a general statement that just because this is a different color, it's not going to perform as well. She also did this one right here, Camassia, and she picked these two again, are both native. This was taken in out of the industry, grabbed this one and started cultivating it, but it still have native parents, so they're both natives. And she felt that Jan Hayes felt that this one, even though we might think of it as the oddball, would actually outperform the one that we're used to because it tends to bloom longer. So her hypothesis was this one was going to perform better. And in the end, she was right. Actually, the white variety had many more bee, not many more, but statistically more bee visits than the one that we are normally used to. So in this case, you know, I probably would have guessed it would have been opposite of this, but it wasn't. So the end story of this whole thing with nativars and natives, it's not clear cut. Link will tell you all the time that, you know, especially when it comes to nectar, there are just some amazing plants out there that are just produce so much nectar and are not native that are great for bees. They might not give them everything they need, but they're still good plants to include. And some of the research isn't just, it's just not as solid that, hey, you have to do native plants. Now, if you were asking me that question about Lepidoptera, about butterflies and moths, the research has swung in it towards you need the natives because of co-evolving herbivores. They're herbivores. They need to chew things, and they need to be able to chew certain plants that don't have the toxins that kill them. Bees are a little bit different. They're looking for different resources at times. So it doesn't mean I've got apple trees that have so many bees on them, or plum trees that clearly are not native, but do really well on my early bees. So it's not clear. We can all debate this. I hear it debated all the time, and that's fine. I just haven't seen any research that tipped the scale one way or the other. I guess the bottom line, don't feel bad about having non-natives. Any other questions on just flowers for a second before I jump off that?
I actually have a question. Do you take into account agricultural flowers, like things like oregano, kale, arugula? Because those are, I mean, those are great to plant in the fall. And if you treat them as permanent plants, you're gonna, I mean, there's really a lot of benefits all the way around, because you get the plants all the way around, and they all have flowers. You just let them bulk. And I can tell you from experience, oregano attracts a lot of different species, flies, the little skipjack butterflies, and lots of bees, lots of tiny bees, because they have tiny flowers too. So I was just wondering if, you know, I know that you do like sort of more like public areas, but I'm just wondering if that's, if you run into that, or if there's any sort of research on like how much pollen they produce, how much nectar they produce, etc.
Yeah, a lot of those either the, I don't know, vegetables that you let bolt and or Mediterraneans like the herbs are great for bees. I have found that they tend to attract a lot of honeybees, but the thyme, cilantro, if you let it bolt, like you said, all the mustard family, cabbage, kale that you let bolt, all of those just have swarms of bees on them, as well as all the other pollinators. So I'm a firm believer that, you know, when you're tired of eating the kale, instead of pulling it out, just let it bolt and go to flower, and it'll just help your overall population. So absolutely, I agree with you 100%. Those are all great. And not
Kale is
native.
amazing. I had a kale plant that grew for 6 years.
Yeah. If you just keep whacking away they're pretty hardy. They go through the winter, they go through everything. They're great.
Yeah, they like the cold, in fact.
Yes, they do. Yeah, they tend to bolt in the warm weather.
Yeah.
Just some general things about your garden. One, leave the leaves. It's just great for the soil, but as well as there are lots of organisms that like to spend the winter underneath them, including bumblebees. So as much as you can, I rake all my leaves off my lawns and all that good stuff, but I just pile them up in the garden and let them go. I can't. I'll talk about dirt in a second, but I can't think of a better additive to your a natural additive. I don't know why people put bark on their yards, because it's this is better. I just think it breaks down quicker. It has more benefits. I guess the benefit of the bark, if you put 3 to 4 inches on, it does suppress your weeds, but most people don't put 3 to 4 inches, so it only encourages weeds. So I would leave the leaves on if you can. If you don't like it, that's great. Everybody gets to garden how they want, but it is really good for the overall habitat that you're building. The other thing is leaving the stems for your perennials. And if you haven't seen this graphic over here on the right, there's a lot of confusion as far as leaving stems in your yard for the stem nesters. And Heather Holmes came up with this graphic right here that she made that kind of explains what to do. And I could probably simplify it a couple ways. One, in the fall, do not cut back your perennials. It's great for the birds. They'll eat the seeds. You just leave them. It's early spring that you cut them back. You can drop all this stuff down here, or if you want a really clean yard, you can throw those away if you'd like, but leave these stems here. And that's it. You can go through all the rest of the steps if you want here. But generally speaking, those stems that you leave will have stem nesters in there. The problem is, I think a lot of people think they all show up in the spring like a mason bee does. And then that means that you can cut them midsummer or in late June and then put them in a section of your yard. But there's a lot of late summer bees that are using those as well. I would just recommend personally you leave those there forever because they only last for about a year and a half. And then the next time around, do the same exact thing. If you look at this picture right here, cut these in the next spring, but here's the old ones still here. Leave them. I have found in my yard that the new growth pretty much covers all those stems. It actually gives it a little bit more, it prevents your perennials from getting a little leggy. They've got something to lean against. And I don't worry about when to trim these totally off down here. Because I think that's when people, I don't know when you trim them, because if they're overwintering in that stem, I don't know what would be a good time to trim those. So I would just recommend early spring, cut the tops off your perennials, and leave them and do the same the next year. Why don't we cut these off earlier? Well, if you cut these off earlier, water gets into the stems, they tend to degrade, etc. Leave this on for a little bit of protection through the winter and then cut them off. Pretty easy system, doesn't really mess up your yard. And I'm kind of a fanatic on, I had weddings at my yard and I needed it to look perfect. And nobody ever saw those dead stems in there. So leave your stems for the stem nesting bees. Somewhere 27 to 30% of bees maybe are stem nesters. I don't know. Whatever statistic you want to listen to. I don't know how the math works if 70% of your bees are ground nesters and 13% are cuckoo bees, but I guess the cuckoo bees get thrown into the other two groups. Soil itself, I have found, and Link, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's different bees that want different soils that they nest in. That's a clear statement. I've seen it all the way from the desert to the dunes to my backyard. But I think what these bees need is soil structure. So whatever that soil is, whether it's sandy or it happens to be clay or whatever, I think what people do is they till this a lot in their garden. Not only are they destroying nests from the year before, but they're breaking the soil structure, and it takes time for structure to form where all of the exudes from roots and from bacteria stuff make the sticky stuff that hold the particles together in the soil. And you need that to form and the pores to form. So that soil, when these tiny little bees have to dig down a meter sometimes or 18 inches, they need those tunnels to hold their shape and not cave in. And tilling soil, not only, like I said, kills last year's bees, but also doesn't create that that firm substrate. They can drill down. Most of the bee homes that I've seen are literally in roads where people drive all the time. They're in between the ruts and stuff where it's still packed down. They drill right down in there and are happy little campers. So I wouldn't till your soil if you can prevent that or not need to do that. I do no-till at my garden. I'm not preaching to you. I'm just saying for these guys, they would prefer it probably if they have soil structure to build in. So specialist bees versus generalist bees. Again, Jared Fowler on that National Wildlife Federation site lists the bees for this area, the specialist bees and what plants they like. Andrina Stragley there is a specialist bee. It likes death camas. It doesn't mean it's the only thing it's on, because it can nectar on other plants, but it is a specialist on that plant. So if you want that bee, I would plant death camas in your yard. I still don't know, and Link, you can jump in if you want. I just, if that bee's not within, I'm just picking a wild number, but 2 miles of your place and it hasn't been seen there for 10 years, 2 mile, 2 mile radius, I don't think it's going to suddenly find your yard just because you planted its plant. So some of the specialists actually are very common, but some are a little bit rarer. I wouldn't be disheartened if you don't get the exact bee you're looking for. The Bombus boston-dazinskii on the other side, there's a generalist, and you pretty much can put out a paper plate and it'll show up. They will come to a whole host of plants. They're great. They're great pollinators. You've all seen them. They're all over the place. That bee can nectar on a whole host of flowers. If you're kind of wondering, if you don't know what plants to plant for that, go on Discover Life, look up that species, and at the very bottom of the page will list a bunch of plants that they're associated with. So again, if you're building a garden, it depends on what. If you want a whole bunch of a certain type of bee, like a generalist bee, there's a wide variety of flowers you can plant. If you want specialist bees, you'll have to be patient for them, I think, personally. So I'm going to give you a list of resources in a second, but I really like this paper that came out in 2014 called Listmania. And I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. When they did this study, they found that most of the plant lists that are out there are actually the author's favorite plants in their garden and not science-based. And so I would caution you where you go to find your information. If you're a master gardener, you know that you always go to a .edu site, sometimes a .gov site. Never go to a .com site to find information. Please don't go to Facebook to find information, except for its links. Links is good. But this study went through all these lists, and they were just, for the most part, they were garbage. They just were literally what the author liked best in their yard. So there is a better list, or there's several sites that you can get some decent lists on. We'll skip Clark Public Utilities for a second. Jared Fowler has the list of pollen specialist bees and the plants that they specialize on. That's a great list. And David, this talk is going to be posted somewhere. Is that right?
Yes, we're recording it.
Okay, great. So you guys don't have to write these down. Xerxes Society is a great resource if you haven't been on there, and they have a section just on yards and gardens specifically. And then we've got OSU's got a great extension paper that's very comprehensive, has a whole bunch of information on there as well. And then the Pollinator Partnership has an eco-regional planting guides as well. So those are just some good science-based publications. They will give you a little bit different information depending on how they put the envelope around your geographical area. But at least they are based on sound advice. I put down there future resource Oregon Bee Atlas, and I probably should have put Washington Bee Atlas / there, but I haven't talked to Karen about this. I can tell you about a pilot project that the master melittologist, Oregon State, Oregon Bee Atlas has put together for wineries that I keep trying to get Andoni to broaden the audience, but he's just testing it right now. So what they've done is they went to, I think, 7 wineries that were interested in creating pollinator habitat. And they said, here's what we need you to do. We need you to go all around your property for a while and create an iNaturalist project, call it whatever you may, my winery, and then take pictures of all the floral resources you have on your winery right now. And it could be weeds, it could be whatever, but it has to be on your property. And then Oregon State produced a report for them that said, based on the plants that you have on your winery and your location, these are the bees that likely are going to be on your site. And what's great about Oregon Bee Atlas compared to all these other ones are nationally based. Even though Xerces societies in Portland, they tend to be a little bit broader. But in the case of Oregon Bee Atlas, it's hyper focused. I mean, they can literally put data points around your farm, and probably we've snuck on some wineries and done some bee survey on their winery, so we probably know exactly some bees that are on there. But it's hyper focused. So they go through and they say, okay, take pictures of all your floral resources. We'll tell you what bees are likely there. And then they produce, based on the location of that winery, a list of the top 10 plants that you don't have that you should add if you want to increase your bee biodiversity. Really cool resource and hyper focused, that if you think about the data that we're collecting for the Washington Bee Atlas, if we can collect all of that data and go to Lisa and say, hey, Lisa, in your yard, if you do this and set your project up and give us all your information, we can tell you the top 10 plants that you should plant in your yard, the keystone plants you could plant. So I'm pushing for that because I have a farm and I'd love to have them do it on my farm. But eventually, coming out of the Washington Bee Atlas and the Oregon Bee Atlas, we will have some really good information, because the Pacific Northwest has been ignored in the bee industry for too long. But we'll have really good information for that.
Yeah, Michael, just jumping in about the Washington Bee Atlas. One of our short-term plans is to get started actually doing pollen DNA analysis on some of the bees we catch, so we can actually develop seed mixtures for restoration work at the eco-regional level. So
that is great.
That, multi-year project, but same kind of concept as you're explaining.
Yeah. There is so much data being produced right now that it's a matter of which direction people want to go. But yeah, it's actually really fun to watch. I'm going to jump back to where I work, Clark Public Utilities, just to give you an example of resources that are out there. And we are not the only one that has these types of things, but I started a pollinator project here in 2020. And basically our idea is to plant 2 pollinator gardens on our properties. We have 288 of them. All of them have a little bit different theme. But on our website, then we produce a list of plants. In the lower left, we tell you when they bloom, what color the bloom is, generally speaking, what types of pollinators are attracted to them. On the lower right, we tell you what height they are. All sorts of information like this. Oregon State has some great landscape plans, much like this one. This one's actually our landscape plan that's on our website. But if you're looking for ideas for landscape plans, I'm going to mispronounce her name, but is it Signe? Signe, down at Oregon State, has some great plans that she has posted. She's a fabulous designer for pollinator gardens. They aren't necessarily bee gardens, which is fine. Most of the stuff crosses over, but there's all sorts of, instead of having to reinvent this, or if you have no skill at doing this type of thing, there are lots of good resources like that are out there. There's lots of blooming charts like this. I know Washington Bee Atlas has postcards that have a lot of this type of information, when they bloom, etc. Oregon Bee Atlas does as well. So there's just a lot of this resources out there. I know this is a lot of information and it's kind of a little geeky. You can't really make a mistake. You can't really make a mistake in your garden. It's your garden. Do whatever you want. if you're going to be disappointed with your results, you just need to do a little bit more research on the plants that you want to put in there. But I'll give you some general things. If you put Asteraceae in there, that family, generally speaking, they have a whole bunch of really good plants that bees like. Fabaceae, the pea group, also has some really good plants that bees like. The combination of those two probably cover a lot of ground for you. But then just spend some time out in your garden. Spend some time out in your neighbor's garden and observe and see what's being used. Go to these public gardens. Ours, for instance, are open to the public, and people can come here all day long. We'll take them on a tour. We'll show them what we did. We'll show them what worked and didn't. There's a lot of these public gardens, and more are going in. And if you don't know, in the state of Washington, House Bill 5253 passed a few years ago that asks all public works projects to have 25% pollinator habitat. So we'll get some more ideas when that starts coming through the system. I don't think anybody has figured out who's going to police that yet. So I don't think there's any teeth in that law yet. But all schools will have to have some pollinator habitat. A highway interchange will have to have pollinator habitat. So there's going to be a lot more examples of pollinator plants out on the spectrum that you can look at and get some research just by simply going to a park and taking a look at what plants are being used at what time of year. And with that, I think I'm right on time.
Yeah, so Michael, you were on my list of things to talk about or ask about was that state law about creating habitat for pollinators on not public lands, but for utilities and things. So that does seem like an opportunity for, let me just pause and say, one of the reasons we have the Native Bee Society is to be advocates for native bees and other native pollinators. It does seem like there's a role for community members to talk to their local utilities and other entities about what are you doing to implement that law. Have you seen much of that happening around the state?
I have seen none of it because what I do in Clark County, I called every single city that has a public works department and asked them if they were adhering to that law, and they had not heard of it. But I know Clark County now knows about it because I called every single city here and asked them that question, but it's not gone anywhere. I've asked Katie about it, and so far it's just a little bit in limbo. Well, no, it's a lot in limbo right now.
If a community member wanted to reach out and ask their city or county how they're implementing the law, what part of city or county government would we reach out to? Can you give us some ideas of where to start the conversation?
Yeah, and they have different names, but it's whoever's in charge of their public works projects. Sometimes it's their maintenance department. Sometimes it's their parks, and sometimes I call both departments if they have, if they're a larger city. But normally, it depends on how small you're going to get, but most of them have what's called a public works division, and that's who I talk to. What I found helpful is that Senate Bill 5253 is fairly large. I literally just make sure I know exactly where the one paragraph is that has to do with putting in the 25% pollinator habitat, and I asked them if they would like me to send that to them.
Great idea. Thank you.
Yep.
I have something, an idea on that. Reach out to your public. If schools have to have 25% pollinator plant coverage, then many schools are instituting or already have school gardens. So that would be, there's a lot of cooperation you could probably do, and I mean, there's a lot of people who are already wanting to do that, and like this would just give them more ammunition, so to speak, to implement that.
Yeah, and I want to be really specific. The law says that if you're doing a public works project, so if you're an existing school and you're not doing a project, and I'm not sure that literally if the kids are doing a school garden, that constitute a public works project, but if literally you're changing the sidewalks, remodeling the school, and you have to change the landscaping, that's going to trigger that law, not necessarily if you're doing raised beds. So it's an active public works project. You don't have to retrofit any public building.
I see.
So this is a time if people have questions. I didn't see too many questions come up in the chat. I didn't necessarily monitor it absolutely all the time, but go ahead and ask a question if you have one, please. Well, Michael, you covered a lot of territory. You gave us a lot to think about. You gave us some really good tips for how to be successful. You gave us lists of plants to consider putting in our garden and when to put them in our garden. And you've given us ideas on how to reach out to our local governments to figure out how they can do a better job of providing pollinator habitat. Because to follow up on the point you made, is that it may be limited to public works projects, but the whole concept we're really trying to get to is think about pollinator habitat when you're changing your grounds, when you're doing stuff. Whether or not it's required by law, it's really what the citizens, community members, and nature need. So we really need to be strong advocates for improving the quality of the habitat around us.
Yeah, I agree. It's about being just intentional in those decisions. If you're going to put a shrub in, there's no reason you can't switch out a arborvitae for something that has some habitat value.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Lisa had a question, didn't she?
Lisa.
If you want a post question. Yes, this week, Terry Gross was talking to Ben Goldfarb, and he wrote a book called Crossings, How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet. And apparently they were talking about pollution, things from rubber, whatever's washing off the road. And then you plant the pollinator thing next to the road where it's not really the best location maybe for the animals. And she wanted to know more about that. She's into sustainability. Any ideas? I think some of the plants would help filter some of the things, but that's all I know.
Yeah. Did you attend that seminar that they did with the road ecologist? Is really pretty interesting. It's more about doing passageways, like putting underpasses for deer to go through, etc. But they were talking about habitat alongside roadsides and whether or not it increases the chance that the bees are going to get hit by a car, etc. I can just, this is just a 100% personal observation that has no fact. All I do is roadside hunt all summer long, and we find the most interesting bees and the highest populations are generally right along the roads. So I don't see a decrease in population, other than every once in a while, if you get a really one that has a lot of semis coming through, it tends to, I don't know, maybe it's too much wind for them or something like that.
Oh,
but
really?
there's so many bees along the roads, and we're not talking, they still have to, for fire reasons, they can't put the plants right up against the roadsides. In that type of environment, it's set back by whatever that gravel shoulder is. So is exhaust great for bees? Probably not. But I'm guessing that window is pretty slim, would be my guess.
I've got a follow-up question. You said you speak to like different utilities, et cetera. How conducive are they to, to doing this kind of work, to increasing, pollinator plant coverage?
So interesting enough, there is a movement. Pollinator Partnership is kind of spearheading this, and they're trying to get utilities across the nation to embrace what we're about to do. This was phase one. We wanted these gardens that everybody could see and come and visit. Phase two is we want to put pollinator habitat in rights of way, so under our power lines. And Pollinator Partnership is working with the managed group, a group of people called Managed Group and Managed Lands, which are all the utilities, etc. If we could get all of the utilities together to do this type of things, it would be 5 million miles of pollinator habitat that connects just about every endangered habitat there is for genetic flow. And if we could get the railroads and the highway departments to do it as well, you've connected everything. It's not it's not an easy lift. So as a utility, we do a lot of surveying. And if we survey our customers and we ask them, are you in support of, I'm just picking random things, pollinator habitat, and are you in support of XYZ? If they're all kumbaya, things like that, everybody's yes. And then when you ask them that next question, are you willing to pay 10% more on your rates? Everybody says no, right down the line on every single thing. So there's a balance in all of this stuff. House Bill 5253 starts paving the way because it actually forces public works projects to do it. So we don't have a choice. There's Senate, that was Senate Bill, I'm sorry, Senate Bill 5253. House Bill 1114 is encouraging utilities, has allowed electric utilities to start reimagining how we can spend some of our money in habitat. So there are some laws coming down that allow us to walk that fine line. Embracing is interesting. I've done a lot of these for utility groups in the Northwest. Northwest Natural's embracing it. I've consulted with them on a couple projects on over pipelines. BPA has created 2 of their own wildflower seed mixes. And I don't know if you guys are aware of the big project down in Portland at Forest Park, the big park that goes through Portland. BPA did a huge project, a pollinator project down there. So there are utilities that are jumping into this, but I will be candid. There's thousands of miles between each utility. I think we're the first one in Washington that has taken it to this degree. Most of them love it, but it's a balance of power. For us, we do a lot of restoration. We just hit 1 million trees we planted this year. What's interesting is we've never talked about it in terms of pollinators, but 100% of the trees that we planted on our projects, so that means all the 1 million trees are all pollinator plants. They either are floral resources or they are host plants for Lepidoptera. So there's other ways to look at what the utilities are doing, because many of them are doing restoration projects, not necessarily pollinator gardens.
And what was the name? What was the House bill again?
The House bill is 1114.
1114. And
Yep.
then, and what was the name of the national consortium of?
Pollinator Partnership.
And but you also
And
said there was utilities that were.
yeah, it's the Committee for Managed Lands for Pollinator Partnership. And if you do Pollinator Partnership and put in, I'm thinking real quick, what would be a good search term for it? Just put in rights of way.
Okay.
There's a lot of different groups. Iris out of Chicago is working on a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of groups that are trying to leverage people that are just land stewards. Like I said, we own 288 pieces of property. What we have decided to do is just be more intentional about how we do stuff. So I'm doing a substation right now. I'm designing a garden for that one because we have some security risks there. So I'm going to take out, well, we already took out of the landscaping. Now we're going to replace it, and I might as well replace it with pollinator habitat. So
Awesome. Yeah, this really very encouraging, because I mean, I look at, these sort of green spaces, out in Redmond or whatever, and I look and they're like, yeah, I mean, they're great green spaces, but where's all the flowers?
yeah,
It's
the battle comes in maintenance. It's really easy to get money and it's really easy to build stuff. It is really hard to get money to maintain stuff, and it's really hard to maintain stuff. Nobody's energized about pulling weeds and doing that, because that's the other side of it. I mean, in order to do these gardens, we have never used insecticides or anything, but we do on some of these properties use herbicides. What we have chosen to do on our pollinator gardens is stop using herbicides also. That means that we have to put resources towards maintaining them. And if you don't put down bark, you have bare dirt, you're going to have weeds, and it's a different game. So down here, they're trying to get the city of Vancouver to become a bee city. And the only hiccup, they've got support from everybody except for the maintenance crew, because they have a limited budget. So it's really great to say, hey, this is what you need to do, and you need to increase, you need to spend more. It's like, I don't have the budget to do it. And no one's that I have found has found the secret to building these gardens, that they aren't an increase in maintenance rather than bark and pre-emergence.
Well, the next stage is like to get them to realize that weeds are good and not bad. And it's like that's I mean, once you realize that weeds are actually your friend, and if you just I do permaculture, so
Mhm. Yep.
it's like the stuff that I plant intentionally, it works great with all the weeds. In fact, sometimes the weeds grow so tall that the other stuff has to grow tall to keep up with it, and it's like win-win. I don't have to do as much weeding, and I've got more plants.
Yeah, but it's a public perception game.
I know.
ODOT found this
I
out
know.
real quick. They planted these beautiful pollinator gardens, and when they went to seed, they got complaints because they were brown, and now the people who loved them wanted them all mowed down. And we have it here. We haven't told even our bosses here, but we let the lawns go. So there's dandelions and clover in our lawns, which we haven't had here before. I am sure the public is going to make some calls, and if it goes to our commissioners, then we will get pressure to make those lawns pretty. And there's only one way to do that, and that is to nuke the flowers. So it's an interesting game when you're working with the public, and until we can get that perception and to change, like you're talking about, that weeds are not bad. It's dicey when you're in the public eye.
Yeah, that's
It
why you got
depends
to
upon
start
the
with the
weeds.
schools. You got to get the students to realize that like this is and then you have 10 or 15 years of people going, no, keep the weeds.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Well, I have one comment, and because these are all flowers, perennials, annuals, but also shrubs like like for utility particular, one plant that I see that gets lots of bees is the holodiscus discolor, right? The ocean spray.
Mhm.
And it of course, like in something like utility yard, like you're worried about security, it's pretty hard to get through that.
That's an interesting point, because the substation I'm doing all shrubs, and I'm not doing perennials, and I'm not doing annuals. It's 100% shrubs. Well, that's not quite true. There's a park across that has some Rudbeckia, so I want to pull that color over to this side. But other than that, you are right. It's all shrubs, and it happens to be I have ocean spray in that one. So that is very true. In fact, you take a big leaf maple tree, if it's mature, it has as much floral resources as an acre of wildflowers. So trees and shrubs are great, and from a maintenance standpoint, they are a lot easier than what you're looking at on the screen right here. That takes a lot of maintenance.
And grasses.
Grasses are good for
Some of them.
habitat. Yeah, for habitat, and they're actually good for some of the butterflies that actually use them as host plants as well.
They fall over and then bees and wasps nest underneath them.
Yep.
Cool. Those are nice.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for being willing to meet with us tonight. I think I don't want to speak for everybody, but I certainly learned a lot, and I think a lot of people did too.
Great.
We laid
Happy
it out
to
in
do
a
it.
very comprehensive but understandable way, and we walked through a lot of questions to get a better understanding. So thank you.
You're welcome. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Karen Wright will be talking next month. Our
Oh,
new
good.
agronomist. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night,
for
everybody.
attending.
Thanks for coming.
I've got one more reminder before everybody goes.
Okay.
We're people who are on the board and or in committees. We're looking to expand people who are willing to facilitate meetings, because Kate's been doing it for a long time and she's got a life. So we're trying to sort of spread the joy around and have people pick up responsibilities. So you can reach out to some of us and we can guide you through that. It's not an easy thing, because you have to arrange schedules and find speakers, etc. But we are trying to sort of spread the love around, so to speak.
I had one other question. Where will this recording be found?
Facebook.
YouTube.
Sorry, YouTube. I was trying to say online. Duh. And it's under Washington Native Bee Society.
Okay, thank you.
We have 5 up there right now. We have some that haven't managed to get back on the screen. Summer's bee season. and gardening season. So maybe we'll get around to that now that it's cold.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience for everybody else that's still waiting.
And with that reminder, I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording portion off.
Yes.